Welcome back to Proxy Hammer, and today we're finally going to be talking about Windrider host. Man, it has been a rough week for me. Been very busy, and honestly, a lot of personal things have come up this week, and I just didn't have the time to do the video. In addition, it took me longer than usual to wrap my head around this detachment, and I just felt it wouldn't be fair, and also it'd be, kind of a little bit of a falsehood if I went on here and I talked about the detachment, all the strategies for it, if I didn't really have a firm grasp of how it worked. So my last couple games with it were really fun, and I learned a lot at the 2K level, and I think that truthfully, this list is meant to be played at the 2K level. I think at the 1K level, it's a little bit, has some issues. So we'll discuss that later in the video, but for now, let's go ahead and dive right in. All right, so first of all, we're going to be talking about the detachment ability, enhancements, and stratagems of the Windrider host. We're going to be talking about the best units in the detachment and why they are the best, the general strategy, strengths, and weaknesses of it, and an example army list that I've been using in my own games that I've finally, kind of tweaked to my own personal perfection. And lastly, a rundown of how to set up and use the army on Tabletop Simulator. Okay, so what is the detachment bonus? Well, basically, first thing, Windriders gain battle line. That doesn't seem like a big deal, but it actually is. It's a huge deal because that means that a lot of your Windrider units can benefit from a lot of the different, mission rules and stuff like that. So being able to shoot and still perform an objective is really strong. Being able to, kind of be in melee and still be able to perform objective is good as well. So that's the first thing. The second thing is your units can deploy in reserves. So that means that in a way you can have more than 500 points of mounted units in reserve. So Asuryani mounted and Viper units from your army can be set up in reserves. So that doesn't count as your limit because reserves is different from strategic reserves. Now, during the battle, such units can be set up on the battlefield as if they were arriving from strategic reserves, but notice how it's worded. That means that those units, those mounted units and Viper units that you put into reserves at the start of the game don't count towards your limit. So that is pretty good. And obviously it is needed because, the units can get quite expensive. Also, this has a second part. This has a part 2. For the purposes of setting up these mounted or Viper units from your army on the battlefield, treat the current battle round number as being one higher than it actually is. So this is really good. This means you can put a unit in reserve and they can come in on turn 1 on your, table edges, and on turn 2 they can actually come in your opponent's back table edge, which is really threatening. In addition, you can pick up units from your army and place them in reserve at the end of your opponent's fight phase, basically, right? So at the end of your opponent's fight phase, at the end of their turn, you can go ahead and pull up your units and put them back in reserve, and then they can, of course, come in the board next turn. So that's basically uppy downy, right? So your army gets a built-in uppy downy, just like Grey Knight Teleport Strike or Hypercrypt Legion, which is really, really good with this kind of setup. Now, the number of units you can select for a strike force is 2, which is, fairly acceptable. This is what I think Hypercrypt Legion has to deal with. I think Grey Knight Teleport Strike gets 3 on strike force, but, 2 is a solid number, and 2 is usually all you need anyway. All right, let's look at the enhancements. First, we have the first drawn blade. Doesn't seem that good. It's Asuryani mounted model only, so only jet bikes. Models in the Bears units have the Scout's 9 ability. This is actually great for only 10 points. So whoever wrote this and pointed this out must have been smoking some good reefer, because honestly, 10 points for Scout's 9 on Windriders, absolutely, sign me up. It's really, really strong. Absolutely necessary, in my opinion. I didn't think this at first. I thought this was a luxury item that you just spent when you had extra points, but it's actually pretty good, and I've made very good use of it in my own games. We have Mirage Field for 25, and again, the same guy must have been smoking some reef, because this one's a little bit useless. So each time an attack targets a bearer's unit, subtract 1 from the hit roll. That seems really good, But keep in mind, your unit is extremely squishy, and this really doesn't do a great job for the points at protecting the unit from the weapons that are going to be dealing the most damage to it. So honestly, this is what I would call a luxury buy. If you have 25 points left in your army and nothing else to spend it on, this is for you. If not, then, it's really just a waste. Searside Strike. This is an auto-include enhancement. I think it is the cornerstone enhancement of the detachment because it allows your Farseer, your Ozerani mounted Psyker model, which will be the Farseer because he has the most damage. So the Warlock Skyrunner won't have this. Well, the Warlock Skyrunner can't even take it, so the points move there. So the psychic weapons equipped by the bearer have the anti-monster 2+ and anti-vehicle 2+ abilities. This is insane. This gives your Eldritch Storm ability the power to kill monsters and vehicles fairly easily, especially with all the bonuses that you can get from the detachment as well. Because remember, in Windrider blocks, you're also re-rolling your hit rolls. So you're firing that Eldritch Storm off, you're firing that Shining Spear off, or Singing Spear, you're firing that, twin Shuriken Catapult off, and you're re-rolling all of your hits, and then your psychic weapons have anti-monster, anti-vehicle 2+. Pretty good for only 15 points. Lastly, we have Echoes of Ulthanesh for 20 points. This is a, kind of a CP generator, but it's a random CP generator. It's really not that good. And you basically have to be in either the midfield, no man's land, or your opponent's deployment zone to have a good chance of getting a CP. So if you're in no man's land, you get +1 to the roll. If you're in your opponent's deployment zone, you get +2 to the roll, and it's on a 5+. So if you're in your opponent's deployment zone, it'll be a 3+, but it's in your command phase. And that's the problem. It's not just any time you get to roll it. It's in the command phase. So when you come in from reserve with that detachment bonus rule, some people may think, oh, that's perfect. I can just come in the opponent's deployment zone and I get a 3+. Unfortunately, no, it's only if the unit survives. And usually that's not going to happen. This is a terrible enhancement. This is really just a kind of a fluffy enhancement for people who don't want to actually take Eldrad in their lists, but still want some extra CP generation here and there. All right, let's talk about the stratagems. So the stratagems are really good. So the first one is Death from on High. In your shooting or fight phase, you select one Ozerani mounted or Viper unit from your army that just came from reserves this turn and has not been selected to shoot or fight yet. Until the end of the phase, each time a model in your unit makes an attack, you can re-roll the wound roll. So this is really, really strong. Now, unfortunately, it has to be that your opponent came from, or that you came from reserves this turn. So that can be a little bit hard to get off, but this is going to be used primarily on your Windrider blocks who are already going to have lethal hits, who are already going to be re-rolling to hit, and now also get to re-roll to wound. And potentially also have -1 AP, which we'll talk about in just a second. So this is a very good stratagem for 1 CP. This is something you should be using most turns in the game. The next one is Overflight. This is another really good stratagem. Your shooting phase or fight phase, keep in mind it's both. Just after a mounted unit from your army destroys an enemy unit, you get to make a 7-inch normal move, which is really good on something like Shining Spears, because what you could do is you can charge an enemy because it's or the fight phase, right? So you destroy the enemy unit, you can immediately move 7 inches. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, you can also consolidate, because if you destroy an enemy unit, there's a step for that unit because that unit did fight, right? Then you can consolidate. And you can actually also use a battle focus token to consolidate 6 inches. So if you are able to get a unit of Shining Spears into combat and kill something off, you can move an incredible distance afterward, which is really good. Having said that, I think Shining Spears are decent. I think they're a good unit in this detachment, but I don't think you should over-rely on them because they do have some issues with actually killing stuff if you roll bad. And again, that's something I usually don't like to put into, kind of put into the universe, but in my experience, about half the time, despite hitting on a 3 and wounding on a 3, about half the time I use them, they just flopped. So it's one of those things. I think having them on the board is important because of the threat they pose to opponents, but I don't actually think they're a unit that can always take on the target that they go after. Okay, next we have Wind of Blades. So, Wind of Blades is really powerful. It is, you can fall back, shoot, and charge, and you can also advance as well and shoot and charge. It's really good. So, being eligible to shoot and declare a charge in a turn in which you advance or fell back is a beautiful stratagem for just 1 CP. And of course, only works on mounted and Viper units, but that's really only what you would want to use it on anyway in this particular list. Next is Daring Riders. So Daring Riders is, you basically get to set up your unit that was coming from reserves, your mounted Windriders or Viper, anywhere on the battlefield that is more than 6 inches horizontally away from all enemy units. So this is really insane. And actually, there's a second part to this. So when doing so, if your unit is set up within 9 inches horizontally of one or more enemy units, until the end of the turn, it is not eligible to declare a charge. But that means if you're outside of 9 inches, you can still declare a charge potentially. So if you don't need the 6-inch, well, let me put it this way, right? If you don't absolutely need the 6-inch deep strike, but you want to deploy on more board space, besides just what strategic reserves give you, which is just the board edges, if you want to deploy somewhere and then also charge, you could use this stratagem, deploy outside of 9 inches as a normal deep strike, and then still charge afterward, as long as you're outside of 9. So this is, a lot of people don't think of that. And in a lot of cases, it's not going to help you, but there is one case where it will. And some of you guys will know what I'm talking about, but Shining Spears. Right? Shining Spears. So if there's if your Shining Spears really can't get a good target, but there's a target in the backfield that they can come in and they could, maybe shoot a little bit and then charge them at 9 inches if they're, between a wall or something like that. Yeah, you need a 9, but with a command reroll, it's possible, right? And that could change the course of the game. So this is usually going to be used on Windriders to come in within 6, blast a target off the board, make it hard for your opponent to screen you, but it also has the potential of allowing you to set up things like Shining Spears being pulled into reserves with the detachment bonus and then put back on the board and charging something else. And again, when they charge and kill something, you can also use that other stratagem we talked about, Overflight, which they move 7 inches and then they can consolidate 6 inches afterward. It's really crazy, guys. I mean, this detachment has so many possible combinations. Most of them don't come into play often, but when they do, you want to be sure to recognize them because they can be really game-changing. All right, the next one is Focus Firepower. This is just good. Just gives your Aeldari mounted or Viper unit -1 additional AP, which is really strong. So it's obviously going to be used on Windrider blocks the most. It's only in your shooting phase, so a Viper unit, it can benefit from it, but it's much better on a mounted unit like Windriders, or in some very narrow cases, maybe Shining Spears. But yeah, mostly going to be a Windrider-based stratagem. All right, and the last is Spiraling Evasion. So Spiraling Evasion, mounted or Viper unit, you get a 4+ invulnerable save for 1 CP. Well, I just have to say this. It might not save your unit, but it might force your opponent to use a lot more resources on it than they would have liked. It's until the end of the phase, and it also works on Vipers. So I had a game that I had a Viper basically just doing sabotage in one of the ruins. My opponent had some, kind of anti-tank weapons pointed at it, had a couple of melta-guns pointed at it. On average dice, the melta-gun should have taken care of it. I had the 4+ invul. I survived. I scored the objective, right? So sometimes it may not seem likely. I mean, 4+ doesn't always save you, but if it's against like 1 or 2 attacks, it actually can be good on a Viper. So I'm glad they included the Viper in this. But of course, mostly you're going to be wanting to use it on Windriders to protect them from the retaliatory kind of strike. But just don't expect them to survive afterward. Okay, So that is it for the enhancements and the stratagems and all this. So what are the best units in this detachment and why are they the best? So Windriders are the absolute goats in this detachment. They carry the detachment big time. They have insane damage that can destroy even vehicles and monsters when comboed with their stratagems, being able to have lethal hits, reroll their hits, reroll their wounds, have +1 AP. They can take things like Gladiator Lancers and rip them apart like they were child's toys. Really, I mean, it's more expensive than Fire Dragons, but I would say they're very much more reliable just because they can cause all those lethal hits against monsters and vehicles. I think where these guys kind of struggle against, in comparison with things like Fire Dragons, is against things with 2-up armor saves. I think that's really where they kind of hit their plateau. But against things with 3-up armor saves and stuff, they have no problem taking them out. Farseer Skyrunners also add some great damage to Windriders and provide a small durability buff to the army. So, being able to cast Misfortune on something may not seem like it's that big of a deal, and usually it's not, but always do it, guys. Always remember to do it. It can come in handy, very much so. Especially when combined with Vipers, which give -1 to hit debuffs out. We have Warlock Skyrunners as well, which are great for secondary objectives, but when added to a Windrider unit, they can ignore cover, which is insanely good with Windriders. You really need them in Windrider units against armies like Marines or anything with armor. If your opponent doesn't have a lot of armor, and you can just cut through them anyway, like Dark Eldar, maybe you don't put them in the Windrider blocks, but you use them as little, kind of secondary objective scorers who could also come in and flame down a squad of witches that is, maybe blocking your path or something like that. Shining Spears are also a great tech piece that can engage units in hard to reach places, but shouldn't be overly relied upon. Again, like I said, they sometimes hit really good, they sometimes do some amazing things, sometimes they don't do anything. It's really the threat of them doing the amazing things and what they can potentially do that is going to keep your opponent in check. And as long as you remind your opponent, hey, this is what they can do, then, that's all that sometimes they need to accomplish. Vipers, again, I talked about them a little earlier with the -1 to hit, but they also add some secondary scoring as well. So not only can they, add that durability to your army that it doesn't have, but they can also score secondaries very effectively. Storm Guardians provide sticky objectives and some semblance of primary control, which I think you need. And in hindsight, Storm Guardians are really important, especially with Eldrad. It's just needed, absolutely. Eldrad provides that much needed CP generation because you do need to use a lot of stratagems in this army to get it to work properly. And of course, Doom can make hard targets easier to kill as well. Lastly, aspects like Warp Spiders, Fire Dragons, and Striking Scorpions are also necessary for board control and heavy anti-large. Now, I didn't use Fire Dragons in my particular list, but that is because I have a plan with another unit that makes my Windriders hit even harder. But yeah, Fire Dragons are not a bad choice in this army at all as well. Okay, so what's the general strategy, strengths, and weaknesses of the detachment? So here's the general strategy that this detachment wants to do, ideally. It wants to table your opponent and set up for a late game power swing with its huge units of Windriders. So those big blocks of Windriders want to come in and just absolutely annihilate everything on turns 3 and 4. And on turn 5, you just want to control the whole board, sit on the objectives, and win, right? You want to have that huge power swing. You want to basically also be able to score secret missions because you're going to have your Warlord alive, which can come in from reserve. It can, come within 6 of something, shoot something off an objective, and then steal the objective by using overflight and moving on to said objective with your Warlord. That is something that you have to really know with this army, is when you should use secret missions and when maybe you're in a matchup that doesn't really need it. I also want to mention that it does really like fixed secondaries. However, you don't have to play fixed with this army. I think there are some builds that really like fixed, and there are some builds that would probably prefer to play tactical. It really just depends on your playstyle. So, what are this army's strengths? So, it hits extremely hard. It's the hardest hitting detachment in the Codex by far. And I don't say that with any sense of irony. It's really, it just hits super hard, and it's one of the fastest and most maneuverable in the book as well. Obviously, Ynnari right now with its current rules is a little bit faster, beats this out in a little bit of a way, but think how mobile and fast Hypercritic Necrons are, or Grey Knights are, right? And this list is even faster. Okay, though, let's talk about the weaknesses. So the weaknesses are, it is very fragile, and point for point, it is the most fragile for the points detachment in the entire book. Even by Aeldari standards, this army is paper. Imagine Dark Eldar. This kind of reminded me of Dark Eldar, except actually even more fragile. It felt even more fragile than Dark Eldar, and that's saying a lot. As far as its primary scoring goes as well, it's extremely poor in the early game. It's almost non-existent because you don't want to give up any of your big expensive assets early. And unless you're taking a lot of support units to help you with that, the scoring is going to be very low. So learning to master your secret missions is extremely important because you're probably going to want to score that 20 points at the end of the game each and every time. Okay, so now let us dive into the army list that I've created for this detachment that I think works personally best for me. So we have Eldrad Uthran, Lycus, Haughty Spider Mama. We have 3 Farseer Skyrunners. They're each going to be going with the Windrider blocks. Now, I chose to go with the 3 Farseer Skyrunners because they just do so much damage with Eldritch Storm, a Singing Spear, and, the little Shuriken Catapults. They do a ton of damage with those big Windrider blocks. I do have the First Drawn Blade enhancement, which gives me Scouts 9. That's very strong. I do have the Seer Strike enhancement as well, and that's it. The 3rd Farseer Skyrunner just has nothing. I figured this would be my kind of more expendable Windrider block if I ever was in a situation, which I pretty much always am in my games, where I have to sacrifice something bigger later on in the game. It's going to be that just Farseer Skyrunner with nothing, right? And of course, he's not my Warlord or anything like that, so it's not a big deal. I have Storm Guardians in the list and 3 units of 6 Windriders for my battle line. I decided not to go with any minimum units of Windriders because even though they are useful, they tend to just be Overwatch bait, and a lot of the times I'm losing 2, maybe sometimes even 3 of them to Overwatch if I don't token them, and you only have 1 Overwatch token in the movement phase. So I'd rather use it on a unit of 6 Windriders than a unit of 3. So basically what was happening, to kind of like break it down and why I stopped taking three-man squads, is because I would drop down my big unit. I would say, all right, they're immune to Overwatch. They would have to use that because they would just get absolutely obliterated by what my opponents were taking. And then the squad of 3, to be able to, get into a position to score, would have to be in a position usually where my opponent also had something that could Overwatch. And a lot of times what would happen is they would just die. Or 2 of them would die and I wouldn't be able to really do anything. Wouldn't be able to control the objective that I wanted to control because it was easier for my opponent just to wipe them off. Or they just all died. All 3 of them. So I just stopped taking them, stopped messing around with them. They were 80 points a unit and all they were doing was scoring me secondaries typically. And I decided that what I was going to do instead was simply put the points into other secondary scoring units and other aspect units to support my game plan. And that's exactly what I did. So instead of, spending, basically 320 points on 4 squads of Windriders, of 4 squads of 3, I bought 2 squads of Striking Scorpions to control my early game, make it so that my opponent couldn't just bum rush me with melee units. I used those points to spend on 3 units of Warp Spiders, 1 with Lycus, of course, because you got to have the Power Blade goodness with Lycus, and 2 units of Warp Spiders just with the ranged weapons, so the Spinnerite Rifle and Death Weavers, just to kind of go up there, take out some chaff, open up holes in my opponent's army so that I could deep strike in and just crush them. I also have 3 Shining Spears in the list, just a simple little tiny squad of 3 just for tech purposes and, threat purposes. If my opponent wants to stage on their expansion objective, it ain't going to be safe for long with Shining Spears around. But, I know this, my opponent doesn't really know this. Shining Spears can whiff big, right? So like if it's my perspective, I'm thinking, God, those Shining Spears, they might kill the target, they might not. And if I'm the opponent, he's thinking, he or she is thinking, oh God, I better watch out for those Shining Spears, right? Which kind of plays to the whole, board control aspect of the list. And board control is something I really understand as a player, so I decided to put them in there anyway, even though a lot of people don't like them. Shroud Runners are also in the list. Again, this is just a kind of semi-durable unit that I can use to move block or use as an expendable token in my army. I didn't really say that they were the best unit in this detachment, and they're really not. I just personally like them because they're a little bit tougher than Windriders. They have, extra wounds. They have that invulnerable save, better invulnerable save. 5+ invul goes a long way versus a 6+ invul. It just really does. And then they have stealth on top of that base, all for the same points cost as a unit of 3 Windriders. So I just think these guys are just way better at doing what Windriders were doing before. And usually I found myself, kind of not really even doing damage with the Windriders anyway. So I think the Shroud Runners are just a much better choice. And they can ignore cover. So they can take cover off of something so that, Vipers don't have as hard of a time dealing damage if they need to in later stages of the game. I have my 3 Warlock Skyrunners and my 2 Vipers to round out the list, which I know, guys, Vipers aren't that good. Vipers are trash, right? Everybody says they're trash. You know what? They've done great for me so far. They're a great screening tool. I put them on the edges of the battlefields where I need, screening to be had. Or I could just, pop them back into reserve and pop them anywhere I want to because they're a Viper, which the detachment allows you to do that with. And I could just score secondaries with them, no problem. And guess what? Vipers are 65 points and Windriders are 80, and Vipers do not die to Overwatch nearly as easily because they have a 3+ save, they have toughness 6, so anything flame-based is really not going to do much damage at all to them. So that's why I go with the Vipers instead, because they're just much more reliable for scoring secondaries than the little squads of Windriders. Okay, so now that we've gone over the list, let's hop into Tabletop Simulator and let me show you how the army runs and how you usually set it up on the battlefield. Alrighty, everybody, welcome to our Tabletop Simulator army setup and example. So what we have here is the Windrider host. So this is a list that I have kind of put together over the last really couple months since I started playing Windrider host. And I gotta be honest, Windrider host was probably the hardest army for me to really get my head around. And that's because Windrider host is very different from the other detachments, has a very different win condition. So having said that, we have units in this army that are designed around that win condition and being able to support it while still scoring primary. Because if all we had is jet bikes and all we were worried about was killing our opponent, we would kill our opponent, but by the time we were able to do so, and by the way, that opponent would have had to have been probably not the best at screening and move blocking and stuff like that. If our opponent was, at the end of the game or whatever, we just wouldn't score enough points by then to actually have it matter. So we have put in several units to help us. So we do have 2 units of Striking Scorpions. They're going to help with our early game board control. They're also going to help us establish positions so that we don't get overrun. And they're going to be a screening line if we need them to be. We have Storm Guardians with Eldrad, kind of to screen the backfield or provide sticky objectives again. We're going for that, primary game. We have 3 Shroud Runners, which are just a kind of a tech piece, but they're also weirdly good at move blocking, and we can also pick them up and put them down anywhere we want to with the Windrider host detachment rule, because they are a mounted Azerani unit. So what I like doing with these guys actually is they're very expendable, and their big base sizes allow them to very easily screen things out, especially with the option for a 6-inch deep strike, quote unquote. So that is really good. We have 1 unit of Shining Spears, again, a tech piece. Shining Spears are very hit or miss. They're one of those units that will either go in, hit like trucks, and absolutely obliterate a hard target, or they'll just miss all their attacks and they won't do anything. I have found this out the hard way in several of my games. I think they can be competitive, but you really have to either have really good matchups with them where, they're really doing a lot of the hard work. I think Shining Spears to me are just a utility unit, right? You use them as a threat so that your opponent can't hide things behind certain walls and can't stage on you as effectively, but they're not going to carry the game. What's carrying the game is the Windrider. So we do have 3 big units of 6 of those. I did test it out with, small units of 3 going around the battlefield, but I actually kind of found out that those units of 3 almost rarely did anything, and I was unfortunately having to, a lot of the times, use an Overwatch token on them, an Overwatch, basically no Overwatch battle focus token, to just keep the squads of 3 alive so that they could perform the objectives. And I thought to myself, why would I do that when I can easily just put some Vipers in the list? I do have 2 Vipers as well. Now these guys, their job is they're actually durable enough to come in, score some points, hit something perhaps with, a -1 to hit if they need to, making this very fragile army a little bit more durable. This is really good against things like indirect fire, things that have the heavy keyword. So if you can put one of these in the back line against, like, for example, an Imperial Guard field ordnance battery, right? And you can, fire off some shuriken catapults and maybe a bright lance at a tank, you can actually get some pretty good results. That means that your Windriders aren't going to die as quick because these are damage to weapons we're talking about with field ordnance batteries, and Windriders have 2 health apiece. So they actually do decent damage against Windriders. They don't do great damage against things like striking scorpions because, who cares if I lose 1 or 2 striking scorpions? But if I lose 1 or 2 jet bikes, that's a huge investment. Okay, anyway, so we do have 2 Vipers in the list. It may seem a little bit weird, but they do have a purpose, and I'll kind of talk about them when we set up the battle. We have 3 Farseer Skyrunners, each with the Windrider blobs. They're going to need to hit really hard when they come in, and so we're focusing on that. We also have 3 Warlock Skyrunners. Now, these are a little bit unique. They're good in the Windrider blobs, but in certain scenarios, if our opponent has a lot of ignores Overwatch, or our opponent has a lot of things that are very light armor, we don't really need ignores cover. If we don't need ignores cover, these guys can go solo, or we can have just one of them go solo to score objectives and the other ones join. It just really depends. So they don't always need to be in the actual blobs, but they are a good addition to them because they significantly increase the damage. We do have also Lycus. Lycus is huge in this list because she boosts all the critical effects, or critical hits, I should say, of our units. So all of our shuriken cannons getting lethal hits are now going to be getting lethal hits on 5s against hard targets. This is especially good at killing targets that really we just have no business trying to target, right? Big tanks, Rogel Dorns, stuff like that we really need to erase. We have Lycus for it. So Lycus can jump up, mark the Rogel Dorn, move block a ton of stuff with their warp spiders, charge something, perhaps do a little bit more damage, and then our Windriders can come in with their shuriken cannons, and they could just hose that vehicle down. So trust me when I say this, a squad of Windriders with a Farseer that has the Seer Sight Strike, with the Warlock Skyrunner ignoring cover, and Lycus coming in and tagging it, can down a Rogel Dorn in a single round of shooting with correct stratagem support. So that also requires more CP, which is another reason we have Eldred. So think about this, right? You have 27 attacks, or excuse me, not 27 attacks. You have 18 shuriken cannon attacks. Is it 18? Yeah, it's 18, right? No, it's 27. Sorry, guys. I'm so silly. Yeah, it's 18, guys. Sorry, because it's 6. I keep thinking back to my old squad of 9. But yeah, it's 18 attacks, plus you have the Skyrunners attacks and the Warlocks attacks. Those are all going to be re-rolling their hits. They're going to be re-rolling their wounds because of the stratagem. And if you want to put another -1 AP on it, you can. You just need another, CP to spend. So you can get rid of big targets with this army. You just have to allocate the proper resources to it. That's a little bit tricky to know when and where to do that at first. But yes, one of these blobs potentially can take out a Rogel Dorn. And I know people are going to bring up the averages and stuff, but guys, a lot of people are running the Rogaldorn Commanders and they have 18 wounds. Searsight Strike gives you anti tank, right? Gives you, a really strong Eldritch Storm and a pretty good, well, kind of a good Singing Spear, but, probably made their armor save against that. And that Rogaldorn's going down. The amount of lethal hits you can put into that target are just insane, right? And you're always going to be fishing for 6s. Okay, moving on. We have Warp Spiders. We have 3 squads, and again, their job, one of these squads is with Lycus, and this is the Exarch with the Power Blades. They're going to be with Lycus, right? But the other 2 squads are for move blocking and target removal. So what I mean by target removal is this army has a huge problem with chaff units. This army really doesn't like to deal with a lot of meaningless chaff that will expose the expensive Windrider blocks to unnecessary fire. So that's why we have the Warp Spiders. The Warp Spiders come in, they kill a chaff unit, and then they set themselves up for an overwatch against a potential, another potential chaff unit that might want to try to do the same thing. So in essence, 2 units of Warp Spiders that are not with Lycus can do this for the first 2 turns of the game, which should be enough to kill mostly all of your opponent's chaff and scoring units right off the bat. That should be your first, kind of priority with this army, is killing those types of units so that your opponent has to expose their more vulnerable and, valuable targets. And then once that happens, you can just absolutely rip their list to shreds. Okay, so that's the list. I know it looks a little bit odd because there's a bunch of Aspect Warriors in it. There's, 5 units of Aspect Warriors. But, I mean, a vast majority of the army is mounted. So, it is still a Windrider host. It just has a little bit of help. It's Windrider host with help. All right, so we're on terrain layout 7. This is how we ended up deploying on this. And again, it really depends on the terrain layout, but I think no matter what I show you guys, it's just a matter of kind of learning the concepts of how to deploy and not really like the exact positioning of everything, right? And I think that's what you guys should get out of it. So where do we start? Well, we always are going to start, again, if they have infiltrators or scouts or whatever, we're going to deploy our striking scorpions in a way to protect our own units. So first of all, as I said with my list overview, we have a Farseer with the first drawn blade. Now, the first drawn blade is Scouts 9. It's only 10 points, and it is so good, guys. It is really good. I didn't think it was that good at first. I didn't take it, thought it was a waste, but I have changed my mind on it big time. And the reason for this is, simply put, it allows your 3 bricks of Windriders to deploy more easily. So we could actually deploy 3 bricks on the field if we wanted to, or we could put 1 in reserve. Having that choice, opponent dependent for just 10 points is really good. Now, usually you're going to want to put at least 1 unit in reserve because what you're waiting for is you're waiting for your opponent to open up. And how are we going to make our opponent open up on round 1? We're going to put these scorpions out here and we're going to open up their lines somehow, or we are going to draw them out with our scorpions, and once they are drawn out, then we're going to open them up. So our scorpions are going to be putting themselves in a position, turn 1, turn 2, to essentially force our opponent to come to us, or we will score primary points. And again, for anybody who is facing Windrider hosts, they know the weak point of this list is primary scoring. So when I designed this list, I specifically had that in mind, and I took Storm Guardians, I took Warp Spiders, I took Striking Scorpions, I took units that were going to help me control primary early on in the game. Our Vipers are back here just in the corners. What are they there for? Guys, they're just there to screen. They're cheap, they're action monkeys. If I wanted to, I could Star Engines them, right? I could Star Engines up. These guys move 14 inches plus Star Engines. They're easily getting to the range where we can contain, right? We can set up a containment if we wanted to. And of course, Striking Scorpions can just do this automatically, so you don't have to burn 2 of your Vipers to do it, just 1 of them. At the same time, we can also score other objectives on turn 2. Like if we wanted to, or on turn 1, excuse me, if we wanted to score something like Established Locust, we have a squad of Shroud Runners that can scout up and do that. If we don't get first turn, we could just move the Shroud Runners to the side. And because this unit right here has scouts as well in the bottom left, we can also move them up here into safety. All right. So whatever deployment type you're on, basically you always want to set up your units so that they can either score objectives turn one and be very fast and annoying for your opponent to deal with, or set them up so that they can deploy defensively and you get a better position on the battlefield. The Shining Spears are set up kind of near the center, but there's also another reason why I set them up here. It is because of this ruin right here. This is your opponent's expansion objective, just like this one is ours. And if you guys don't know, expansion objectives are your opponent's easy objective to get. This is very easy for your opponent to control. It has 3 walls, right? The objective is going into the ruin, so your opponent can control the ruin and never leave it. So our Shining Spears are there as an insurance policy. If our opponent wants to do that, we can move through walls, so we can do this, right? We can give us +2 movement, so we can move 16 inches, which is already like right at the edge of this. We can advance, which will get us right to the edge of the ruin, no matter what. Let's see how far we can get. Yeah, we can get to about there with our bases, right? And then on top of that, because Shining Spears can move through terrain, we can just charge right over it. No problem. Charge right over the unit. We have fly. We can move through them. And then we can assault them and kill them, right? So this, of course it does this. This allows us to make our opponent worry about the expansion objective a little bit, right? Like, we've locked it down on our side. As you can see, we've locked it down pretty good. And of course, your opponent could have units that could take this out, right? But look at what we have to back it up. Again, there's some things that you just have to kind of take into account when your opponent is really fast, has flying, and stuff like that. So, do think on that. But, even if your opponent's like a Blood Angel player and they have advance and charge, they move 12 inches, that gets them right about here. And that's decent, but that's a really hard charge to make if you want to charge all the way around, right? They can't really charge this way. Your Scorpions are going to block them off here, and they're going to have to charge around. That's going to be at least, 9 inches plus another couple. It's like a 10-inch charge, basically, or maybe even 11 or 12-inch charge, depending on where they started over here. And even if they have advance and charge, they'd have to get really lucky to kill the squad of Striking Scorpions. So let's say they do kill the squad of Striking Scorpions, right? Guess what we have in retaliation? We have a bunch of stuff that is just going to wipe out whatever they charged with. So we have enough stuff there to just totally just make sure our opponent doesn't have any fun trying to take our expansion objective. Meanwhile, we have a unit that can perfectly do it because this is exactly what they were designed to do. Yes, they're a little expensive. I realize they're 120 points, but they're a tech piece, so I'm willing to spend the extra points for them. Meanwhile, we have units of Warp Spiders set up here, and basically what the Warp Spiders are going to do is they're just going to, turn one, they're going to jump into these positions right here behind walls so that they can range deep into enemy territory when they need to move block specific things or just cause chaos, right? One Warp Spider squad, for example, behind that wall can touch the back objective, which is absolutely insane. Can go from here all the way from to here with a 26-inch move. Now, your opponent probably knows that, so will counter it, but being able to, dictate where your opponents are moving their models is really important. So having a squad of Warp Spiders right here just sitting here means that nothing behind this deployment line is safe anymore for your opponent. Same thing with these Warp Spiders, right? These Warp Spiders can move behind this little piece, or better yet, they can move behind this little piece. And as soon as they're right here, they can range deep into enemy territory as well, and they can go up to here. Right, 26 inches is right here, which is what they would move with the Battle Focus token. All right, so as you can see, this army is both very aggressive, has a good amount of board control, and can dictate where our opponents move. So what's our next step? Well, after you start to play the beginning stages of the game, it should just be you're activating your Scorpions, you're staging your units, maybe your Shroud Runners get mixed up into something if your opponent, reveals a unit or two, and then your Warp Spiders are just kind of staging themselves. Well, if our opponent makes a mistake during turn 2, this is what we can do. We can drop this unit right in their backfield. Oh, but Proxy Hammer, you can't do that. It's only turn 3 and onwards. Well, guys, the great thing about Windrider Host is it actually counts as a turn higher than normal. So you can drop a unit like this back here on turn 2. You can actually drop them on the sides on turn 1 as well. Keep that in mind. You can actually drop them, anywhere along the board edge here or here on turn 1, which can actually be really detrimental to your opponent. Again, your opponent is going to have to really try to screen hard, and when your opponent's screening a bunch, they're susceptible to warp spiders, they're susceptible to shining spears just coming in and just wrecking their screening units. And once their screening units are dealt with, your Windriders can easily come in and clean up house. Okay, so we come in here. We could even pick up another unit at the end of our opponent's turn and bring another unit in the back, but usually this is not needed. But we could do it. If our opponent left something like, let's say our opponent leaves a single rhino on this objective, right? So what we could do is we could come in with this squad. It could come in like right here. Boom. It could deep strike the 6 inches, pay the command points. And then we could have another unit of Windriders, maybe this one, for example. We can pick that unit up and we could do the same thing over here, and we could burn another unit. We're not going to come within 6. We're going to make sure we're outside of 9. But again, if our opponent makes a mistake, we can do it, right? Like if our opponent has a unit right here, chooses to move them behind here to stage, then we can drop a unit of Windriders back here and just annihilate whatever Marines come out, right? We could even move them a little closer like this. And so we could totally just annihilate them. Now, the cool thing also is, check this out. With this maneuver, once you kill an enemy unit, you have that stratagem that allows you to move 7 inches. So what you could do is you could actually pre-measure, right? You're 6 inches away from whatever that is. So you're 6 inches away from the rhino. Let's move these guys a little closer. You're just outside, and then you kill that thing, and you move 7 inches closer. Now you are in control of the objective, right? So that's what you do. Now, if your opponent is a smart aleck about it, and, smart ass about it, sorry, and says, you know what, I'm going to now put my Marines in a position where you cannot get on this side of the objective, so this unit can't move on it. Well, now you have another unit to shoot it off, and then this unit can move 7 inches. Probably not close enough to actually get there, but you can stagger your shooting. Like, for example, this unit was within 6, right, guys? So this is how you're going to basically get around that. And my buddy has tried to do this, and to no avail with this type of list. So basically what I do is I start my shooting with the squad that is 9 inches away. I kill the rhino because that's no problem. It's a big target. It's easy to see. Then when my opponent deploys their, Space Marines kind of around to prevent, the unit that had that deep strike within 6 can now shoot and kill the Space Marines and then move on to the objective, right? And typically this is a good spot right here because you don't want to also expose yourself. So another common mistake with this type of list is you just go balls to the wall, and you unfortunately sometimes open yourself up to some bad stuff happening to your Windrider bricks. So being able to do something like this, where if your opponent is on this side, the only thing they can do is move back now. And they can shoot you and stuff, but you could also shoot them with Overwatch. Remember, these guys reroll hits against the closest eligible target, regardless of whether it's their shooting phase or not. So they will kill small stuff on Overwatch. I've even seen them do considerable damage to Ballistic Dreadnoughts on Overwatch. It's just really strong. It's not going to probably kill the Ballistas, but, if you spike those dice, you get a lot of 6s, and your opponent is a little bit unlucky, then you could definitely do some serious damage with them. And at that point, your opponent probably kills a lot of this brick, maybe doesn't kill all of it. Your other brick is there to clean up. If your opponent doesn't send 2 or 3 units back here to deal with these guys, you're going to win the game in like another couple turns, right? And that's considering this is turn 2. So you're going to probably win the game by turn 4. It's going to be very decided. By turn 3, you probably already know who's going to win. Okay, so that's kind of how you want to operate this list. Now, what about the Vipers, right? Well, if your opponent has some deep striking BS, then the Vipers can just be used to screen. All right, they could just be here and be like, "Oh, you have 6-inch deep strike? Nope, you're not going to come back here. You're not going to come back here or over here." Same thing with this Viper, right? Just covering your butt, just making sure nothing can come back here and kill whatever's on your back objective, like your Storm Guardians or whatever. But the Storm Guardians can also be used in the same way. Like if your opponent is Hypercrypt Legion or Grey Knight Teleport Strike or whatever, you could just move these guys back, spread them out, and your opponent is never going to be able to deep strike back here. It's just never going to happen. And we just totally closed off all of their options, and we forced them into the middle where it's a kill zone, right? The middle is an absolute kill zone for our army, right? Even if we don't get the drop back here, maybe our opponent's doing a great job, 100% job at screening. They're probably not going to be able to screen out your army for the entire game, but maybe they screen you out for the first couple turns. So then you could just go here with a big unit of Windriders and look at the line of sight you have from this position. You have all of this, you have all of this over here, and your range goes as far as right here. So you probably want to, sorry, I didn't move them the full distance that they could go. They could go up to 6 inches outside of deployment, right? Unless you're using the stratagem. Yeah, so they're about there. That's a little too far, but you guys get what I mean, right? So then they could just spray everything probably to here, which is about what they can see anyway. So that's really strong if you could just put them right there. If your opponent doesn't have the units anymore, like for example, turn 2 or turn 1, your Shining Spears take care of whatever's behind this ruin, screening it out, you can come in over here. And this is even worse for your opponent, because if you're able to come in like this, and your opponent has a big tank or something that's right here hiding, that thing is going to die very quickly, right? This unit can kill big tanks. This unit can kill Gladiator Lancers. This unit can kill repulsors, right? It's very likely that it can kill stuff like that. So yeah, it's a very strong combination of lethality with this army. Okay. All right, so that's the list. That's kind of how you want to run it. Turns 1 and 2, again, just to recap, you want to kind of fight with your Striking Scorpions, try to open up some avenues, clear the chaff, clear the screening units, stuff like that. Turn 2, turn 3, you want to turn up the pressure with your Windriders. Again, turn 2, you can come in the backfield. So you want to be also telling your opponent this. You don't want to gotcha your opponent, right? You want to make sure they know this so they properly screen. But if your opponent's using too much to screen, you just take the middle, right? You take this objective, you are able to probably use your Shroud Runners to take this objective, and then you could use Warp Spiders to move block over here and also take it, right? So there's a lot of things you could do, and then you could, to support your Warp Spiders, you could just drop Windriders near this area as well, do some stuff like that. Or, heck, 6-inch Deep Strike, you could pretty much just go wherever you want, right? So really strong. It's a really strong army, but it does take some getting used to. I lost a lot of games with this list, and I have to be honest, when I first played other detachments, they were difficult, but the learning curve and the way this list plays is much different, and you have to know it's going to be a little bit of a different play style, right? So as long as you have that in your mind and you're willing to practice this list and really get it down, then you'll have success with it. All right, guys, that is going to be it for our Tabletop Simulator example. We'll be back to the video in just a second. Okay, we are back, and in conclusion, Windrider Host, it's a tricky detachment to get a hang of. Trust me, I spent a lot of games, and at first I was a little frustrated. And so the reason why this is the last detachment I'm doing a video on besides Harlequins, because it was frustrating. It took me a long time to kind of get the hang of the list. But now I've kind of gotten more of the hang of it. I've added in my own kind of element to it, units that I personally like from other detachments that do really good for me, and I've found a lot of success with it. It does seem very unforgiving at first, but it's rewarding. It's very rewarding if you're able to actually get the coordination that you need off on the tabletop, and it really feels very stylish and very Eldar. List building can also be very tricky, right? Because a lot of people, when they look at Windrider hosts, they're like, oh, I'm going to do an oops, all bikes list, and then it sucks, right? It has absolutely no primary game. They're much more fragile than they were in the index, and they're just super susceptible to fast melee armies who will just tear it apart. In the index, guys, we had a lot of tools to deal with fast index, like, big bricks of Windriders could overwatch, and you could, absolutely just annihilate pretty much anything that was like charging at you. Even squads of 10 could pretty much just wipe out because you had those extra Windriders. They had sustained hits instead, so you're getting more damage against infantry targets. That's not the same thing anymore, right? It's not the case. So you do need to use other units to support it. An oops all bikes list is not going to be very competitive. However, having said that, I know some people did very well with an oops all bikes list in the beginning when the codex first came out. I just don't think it's something that can be very consistent in competitive play or just in competitive games in general. Okay, so Windrider host. What do I think about it? Well, at first I was a little bit, I'm going to be honest. I was a little bit discouraged by it. I didn't really think it was that great personally, and I thought that it was probably on the lower end of competitive lists. Now I think it's probably, in my book, it's number 4. It goes, and this is just, it's not my favorites, but this is how the competitive ranking goes for me in the detachments. It goes Ynnari, Seer Council, War Host, and then Windrider Host. I think Windrider Host has more of a chance once more people really learn how it works. I think it's going to be better than Aspect Host. I know I keep shitting on Aspect Host. I love Aspect Host. I just don't think it has the tools that really can, get you out of trouble when you need it, And there's a lot of armies out there, people make lucky charge rolls, right? People make 9-inch charges all the time. When you get engaged, when Aspect Host gets engaged and wrapped up, there's not much you can do. Game's a wrap, right? Like, you get wrapped, it's a wrap because you don't have any fallback and shoot and charge stratagems. So yeah. So anyway, tough detachment to get the hang of, but it's absolutely devastating when you do, and it has some of the best damage and mobility that the Eldari Codex can offer. And I think it's really good if you get the hang of it. And after the Ynnari nerfs, depending on what they nerf in Ynnari, I might even think that, Windrider Host and Seer Council are going to just completely replace the Ynnari for Eldari competitive play. So we'll see what happens, but yeah. So Windrider Host, really fun. Definitely try it out if you bought all the jet bikes when you could. All right, guys, that's going to be it for today's video. Well, let me just put it this way. Thank you so much for watching. I know I've been totally absent this week. Just life came up and I just had to deal with it. But it's over now. Videos will be coming out more frequently again, so don't worry about that. If you guys want to support the channel, I do have a Patreon where you can, sign up for, just $2, $3 a month, help support the channel. Even if it's just once, it would greatly help me out and it would, improve the channel greatly, making more videos and stuff like that. But also, if you don't really want to support that way, you can also just join our Discord. That's another way you can support for free. You join a Patreon free trial and you get access to our Discord for no cost to you. You can also support the channel by, checking out my Amazon affiliate link, buying a couple products on Amazon, or you can buy some discounted Eldar apparel. So there's some, right now I have a kind of a coupon going on my channel store page. You just have to check it out and you can get some discounted Eldar apparel to rep your local game store. All right, guys, that is going to be it for today's video. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Have a good one, everybody. Peace out.